Hello everyone, my name is Tamiwa and this is the Next Wave by Tech Cabal. On the last episode, we spoke about what it will take to build the African metaverse. Today, our focus is on building Africa's digital infrastructure. There's no doubt that this is a major factor limiting innovation on the continent. For instance, the African Development Bank estimates that the continent's infrastructure financing needs will be as much as $170 billion a year by 2025, with $100 billion of that we don't have any clear idea of how we're going to fund. The real question now is, how do we build an infrastructure that really allows Africa's innovation economy to thrive? Joining us today to discuss this issue are Andrew Maury, CEO of Demus, and Clement Martineau, co-founder and operations director at IX Africa Data Center. Welcome, Andrew, and welcome, Clem. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to get the ball rolling with you, Andrew. At the end of 2020, only 28% of sub-Saharan Africa's population had access to mobile internet services, and 4G made up only 12% of the continent's mobile phone connections. So from your perspective, what is the state of Africa's digital infrastructure?
Cool. That's a really pertinent question. And so, yes, I think it's true that Africa's digital infrastructure is currently lagging behind global averages. But I also think it's important to reflect a little bit. So if you think about it, just 20 years ago, there were no undersea water cables connecting Africa to the World Wide Web. And the only connections we had were satellite phones and satellite connections that were slow, unreliable, and also 10 times more expensive than the rest of the world at the time. So coming from that background, as little as 20 years ago, if you think about where we are now, Africa has one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing internet economy and penetration rate, with increasing numbers of connections. I think it's still less than 1 billion connections, but it's getting very close. Obviously, much greater coverage. There's a vast improvement in terms of internet reliability and speed. So, another important factor is that the cost of data is actually decreasing. So it's always difficult to see these things when, you are dealing with intermittent connections and degraded networks. But I think it is important just to remember where we come from. And, so while Africa's digital infrastructure has a lot of catching up to do, there's major room for growth in its progression, and it's undeniable that it is progressing. And I think, it can be expected that alongside some investments and further growth, Africa will become a powerhouse of the global digital economy.
Thanks, Andrew. I think that's an important set of caveats for us to keep in mind. A bit of an optimistic view, but definitely very pertinent. So thank you for that. From your perspective, what are the problems we need to solve next?
I think I just want to touch on two items. They're a little bit further down the line than just plain infrastructure, networking, fiber optics, etc. So just a little bit further on down the line. I think there's two major topics that come to mind from my side specifically. An interesting data point is that 19% of sub-Saharan Africa live in areas not covered by the internet. So let's say 20% of people live in areas that there's no internet coverage. But here's the interesting part. 53% of the population that live in areas that do have internet coverage are not using the internet. So why? Why is that? And I think this is likely due to many people not having access to mobile devices. Of course, that is reducing over time, but it also is due to people not always having the purchasing power to be able to buy data. So those are two obvious items. But another contributing factor could be that simply people or sectors are slower to understand the value of adopting and using the internet. So I think the problem of adoption, I think solving this problem could have a great impact on the economy and livelihoods of millions of people. Why are people not using the internet? Do they not understand how it works? Do they not understand the benefits it brings to a myriad of different areas? I think that is a major problem that needs to be solved. So, at Demos, we believe that the youth and its intellectual capability and capacity in Africa presents another opportunity. So this is the second problem. So, in terms of combating poverty, producing solutions to local problems, creating a culture of innovation or technological innovation, and ultimately lifting the economic performance of the continent. So I've seen firsthand how software engineering and cloud engineering skills or site reliability engineering skills, compounded with the rise of remote work, are creating job opportunities for Africans. So, Demos works and very proudly works with organizations like She Code Africa and Dev Career that are making it easier to learn digital skills. And companies in the private sector need to consider their talent pipelines and support them from the ground up. And, companies today, African businesses right now, are facing problems with talent shortages. And I can't help but think, how do we train the next 10 million software engineers in Africa? So today there are only 716,000 software engineers on the continent, and solving this will likely have a large impact with many consequences. So those are the two areas that are not typically fiber optic cables, but are just one step further down the line.
No, I think that's a brilliant perspective to share with us. I guess taking it a step forward, according to the Broadband Commission of the International Communication Union and UNESCO, it'll cost about $100 billion to bridge our connectivity gap on the continent. Digital infrastructure investments alone will require 250,000 new 4G base stations and at least 250,000 kilometers of fiber. So given all of this, how do we direct more investment into digital infrastructure?
Yeah, this is a wicked problem. And, I think the first thing I need to admit is that this isn't my core area of expertise. I've certainly got an opinion, but that is a very large problem. So naturally, one area I think is very useful is deregulation. So I think that could lead to more service providers, healthy competition, etc., to be able to start addressing these problems. Like if you've said that there are 250,000 base stations required, well, it should be easy for these companies to start and operate and facilitate and compete for that opportunity. Policymakers need to realize the opportunities and make it easier for companies to operate in these regions. They need to provide, and I don't know how, but well, I've got some ideas, but favorable conditions for local and international investors. So, entrepreneurs and innovators should be better supported, because it's clear that the private sector can also address these problems and have been addressing these problems. So if we support them better, so ultimately they can solve some of these problems without intervention from governments. So we just need policymakers to open it up, and hopefully private sector can contribute. And I mean, then there's also other areas, innovative areas that we haven't touched on. So a concept like a decentralized, community-owned ISP, like the Zenzaleni initiative in South Africa, could enable interesting ways of bridging this connectivity gap. So, yeah, I think our collective governments need to do a better job at facilitating and enabling all of this.
It's a great set of perspectives, Andrew. I appreciate your sharing your thoughts, despite it not being your area of focus. Next time, we're going to have a financier on here to discuss this with us. I guess to piggyback on that conversation and to further push you into an uncomfortable area, where do you think we need this investment the most? Besides data centers and fiber optic cables, where else do we need to put cash into?
So I'm going to hammer on about it a little bit. The reason why I'm going to partially repeat myself is just simply because I truly do feel like investment in this area will have the largest impact. So we've made some strides in terms of penetration and infrastructure, and that is still continuing. And I agree, this is a wicked problem. But I'm going to just come back to people. And for me, While infrastructure networks service providers are being invested in to provide more people with fast, reliable access to the internet, I personally believe that people need to be educated on how the internet can be used for access to information, education, services, goods, and from my side, most importantly, a platform for jobs. So training people, providing them with digital skills to be employable locally and globally within the digital economy offers opportunities to many young Africans to improve earning capacity, to contribute to local communities and economies. And I believe that this is an urgent and important area that requires further investment and focus.
Andrew, I really like your perspective on all of this. I definitely want to hear a bit more about how you think digital transformation needs to evolve on the continent, what the big drivers have been, and how we push excellence across board in this space.
What would be great, I know this is not always the case, but what would be great if policymakers could clear the way for innovation and collaboration. It sometimes feels like, entrepreneurs, innovators are bashing their heads against, walls that don't need to be there. Small to medium businesses are typically the heart of the African economy, and so they need to be supported and encouraged into the digital economy. So from merchants taking on e-commerce and marketplace platforms to fintech companies facilitating cross-border payments, facilitating greater trade, policymakers need to identify opportunities and remove any obstacles that are in the way, not the reverse, because sometimes the policies are the obstacles. And from our end, we're a 90-person team. People are predominantly in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa. We're expanding into Zambia, Mauritius, the DRC, and many other African regions. And why does that matter? Well, we're solving really hard problems. Our diversity and our backgrounds gives us a lot of strength. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when we started out entering these regions, trying to operate in these regions, it was extremely difficult. We faced several challenges, and I hope the companies that we're talking about, the companies of tomorrow, find more favorable conditions. So, to me, that's the role that policymakers should play. They should open it up for us.
Fantastic. I think really, really clear on that. From your perspective, what are the things that our policymakers need to do to drive progress in this space?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning one item. So we talk about investors, we talk about investing in infrastructure, we talk about investing in companies and solving these problems through public and private sector. The idea about how do we find more companies to invest into. So I think it's worth just touching on what's really going on. So I think there's quite a lot of maturity that's happened in terms of startup accelerators and tech hubs across the continent. So as digital skills proliferate across Africa, it's clear there's going to be more and more entrepreneurs and innovators will be produced. And these entrepreneurs need to be supported and guided. I can think of First Check Africa and Future Africa that are doing just this. And here's an interesting thought. So again, a limited opinion, but what's happening today, the current market trends, I think there's value in encouraging and supporting entrepreneurs to approach business building in sustainable ways. Producing resilient companies that solve problems for the long term. In recent times, it feels like there's been too much emphasis on raising large rounds, growth at all costs, mechanisms to drive inflated valuations. And, I just rather think that, given the change, the talk of recession, etc., that a deep understanding and focus on solving our own problems here in Africa, when approached in the right way, that this will inadvertently attract local and international investors. So instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes, I think businesses that leverage engineering and technology best practices, that focus on building strong team cultures and values that drive high standards, that ultimately this will produce higher numbers of startups to invest in. It sounds counterintuitive, given this extremely long bull run that we just witnessed, that the world just witnessed. But I think the market's turning. There's talk of recession, tightening of private equity, venture capital funds, and so potentially this message of encouragement on sustainability and resilience could be useful. And that's our mission. Our mission at Demos is to empower African businesses through technology and engineering best practices. And I think helping startups leverage technology to solve problems in the long term ultimately produces more sustainable companies and presents more investment opportunities for local and international investors. So I don't know what you think about that, but I think this is pertinent given what's happening in the market today.
Andrew, this has been beyond fascinating. Thank you for your honest and unorthodox answers. It's been a really, really educating conversation. We're going to take a quick commercial break now, and when we come back, we're going to pick up the same conversation with Clement. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. With us today, we have Clement Martineau, co-founder and operations director of IX Africa. Hi, Clement. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Could you tell the audience a bit about what you do at IX Africa?
As my title said, I'm the co-founder. I do a bit of everything and nothing. Started this venture 3-4 years ago with my partners. So I'm based in Nairobi. I'm mostly in charge of the build, so site acquisition, build fit outs. But I also, because I'm the only one here, I'm in charge of the team. I'm in charge also a bit of sales and marketing. I do good coffee. Yeah.
That is useful. Tell me, what does IX aim to do in Africa, IX Africa?
Look, we're not better than others. It's just that we are the first hyperscale data center in East Africa. So we developed this big data center capable of hosting cloud machines. So that's what we're aiming at. We're just aiming at being cloud enabled, capable of having any hyperscale clients. So bigger economy of scale. We just reuse whatever was working in Europe, in the US, in other countries, and duplicated it in here in Nairobi.
Fantastic. From your perspective at IX, what kind of partnerships, particularly public-private partnerships, do we need to facilitate the development of the digital infrastructure space? Like, what kind of partnerships are you finding valuable, or do you want to see in terms of private sector and public sector collaborating?
Of course, there's a lot of partnerships that have to be made, that need to be made, because of course without money you cannot build infrastructure. So it starts from access to money for startups. Okay. Problem with my business, or the kind of business that that are data centers, is that you require a lot of capex, a lot of funding, and that is usually quite difficult to get. The thing is, people and even all those funds, DFIs, financiers, they now understand a bit more what is a data center and what is required. So I think what would be needed is a bit more of education on what is a data center, what is digital infrastructure, because people don't really get it, to be fair. And if you don't get it, it's hard to finance. So maybe a bit more of creating a bit of a vibe, creating a bit of trend, creating a bit of a understanding of what is digital infrastructure, and this is where maybe public partnership could be made with the private sector as well. Because once you understand it, then I think it's usually quite. It makes so much sense that we need to invest in fiber, in data centers, in all the connectivity. But like for me, data centers, people were telling me, look, I don't do real estate. And the other ones were telling me, oh, I don't do infrastructure. because people think infrastructures are usually those big electrical plants or nuclear plants, etc. So others were telling me, oh, I don't do IT, but actually data centers or digital infrastructures are not exactly one of those sectors. It's a bit of a mix. So trying to make people understand a bit more what it is will help, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying we need a lot more education of governments in terms of what sort of digital infrastructure needs there are. We need financiers to have a deeper understanding of the space and to be a bit broader in their investment sort of philosophies. And we need sort of longer term investment in this space. I mean, because it is a capital heavy space. That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And once again, the returns on investments will come if the project makes sense. So it's maybe not thinking too much as a project that needs to make money, but more like, okay, we need to have a social impact. We need to create the infrastructures in our countries instead of tapping on Europe, US. Because today you look at most part of the Google servers or any big cloud services, you're in Kenya, you're in Tanzania, you're tapping from a bit from South Africa, but most likely from Europe. So when I look at my Gmail address or my YouTube, etc., why do I need to collect the data from abroad while I could have the same in here? So then you create a lot of social, you impact positively the job creation in Africa if you invest now and here. So the returns are not really short terms, but they will be there at some point. Yeah.
Okay, so this requires patient capital. It requires the same kind of government subsidies that you have for any sort of large-scale infrastructure to move a country forward, basically. Are there partnership models that you've seen in other markets, in Europe, Asia, the US, that Africa can borrow from? Any kind of partnership models that we should be looking at replicating?
So in my sector, it's usually US or China, right? Because the hyperscalers, the cloud services, the internet contents, they are either in the US, either in China. And today, they're actually themselves fighting a little bit to come to Africa. I will not say to colonize Africa, but to come back and get a market a stake. So yeah, those US and China are usually the one that we need to seduce for them to come and to push this growth.
Okay, so those are the countries we should be partnering with. So with the right investment into digital infrastructure, if we can figure out some of these partnerships, how do you see the ecosystem growing? Like what are the benefits for the continent?
So of course, I'd like it to grow. I've invested a lot of time, effort, and a bit of money in this. So I'd love it to grow. But a population, it goes back to your initial point, like population is growing, young, and they all need their smartphones, their 4G, maybe 5G soon. So this continent is poised for growth. We also, to be fair, Africa is starting from far, so it can only go forward, which is good. Europe, those countries are also aging. People are not really, as I said, savvy, etc. But yeah, if you just take like the normal growth of a GDP of 5-6% for Africa in general, and you apply that to the existing infrastructure, you at least need to because we have nothing today almost, or in terms of fiber network, data centers, etc. So to get to a decent point, we really need to get going, and that's actually what's happening. Nigeria, big data centers are happening. South Africa, big time. Kenya, we're starting us also, and then in each and every smaller countries, there will be a need for medium-sized data centers. So yeah, I mean, I hope it's going to grow. It should grow. If I was able to predict the future, I'll not be here.
That was fantastic. Thank you so very much for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all we can take today. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Andrew and Clem, for coming to share your wisdom and your knowledge with us. Join us next week when we talk about the rise of Francophone Africa's tech scene. Remember, you can tweet at us using the hashtag #TheNextWaveCNBC. You can also send in your feedback via email to thenextwave@techcabal.com. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.